Speedruns are one of the most challenging yet rewarding things you can do in Destiny 2, requiring weeks of practice and learning before you can even start to get your first runs in. This is my team a few seconds away from getting our final PB ever for Root of Nightmares after a total of 6 weeks running across 20 different nights and over 45 hours spent inside this one raid. But to understand how we got here, we need to start at the very beginning. Whenever starting a new speedrun, your first goal is just to learn. And the best way to learn is obviously through failing, and our team is pretty damn good at that.
Ribs him. Shoot.
Source.
Fuck, man.
Who called shoot? Root of Nightmares has 4 main encounters: Cataclysm, Scission, Macrocosm, and then the final Nezarec boss fight. Starting off with the first encounter, aka Cataclysm, your only major goal here is to connect a series of nodes before your team gets wiped, and then to repeat this process for 4 total sets of nodes, with the added mechanic of killing tormentors to extend the amount of time you have before wiping. The thing is, if you're going fast enough, you never need to extend this timer at all. So Cataclysm really just comes down to how fast you can shoot each node, which really comes down to your team's routing. This makes routing for Cataclysm make or break for runs. Very simply, all you have to do is work it out so that there is always somebody at the source location and always somebody at the next node. That way there's always somebody to shoot the source and the node instantly, and you can call out when you do so.
Shoot.
Source. Source.
Shoot.
Source.
I know in practice this looks and sounds easy, but the tricky part is that the source moves around and the order you shoot the nodes in can also change each run. So your routing also needs to adapt to this, especially for the last set of nodes where things can change the most. On top of doing all of this, you also need to be effectively clearing ads to speed up your time while also building your super, because you're not going to get any rally flags until 3rd encounter. And if any one of these things goes wrong, best case scenario, you're causing time loss, and worst case scenario, it's a reset and you start all over again. After the very first night of running, purely practicing the first encounter, we were able to get everything done from start to finish in just under 2 minutes and 15 seconds. It wasn't perfect, but we had a lot of work ahead of us, so for night number 2, we decided to work on second encounter, aka Scission. Scission is just like the first encounter, with the main goal of shooting nodes, but with a giant chasm that you can skate off to your death.
Because you're gonna think about it too hard.
Rek, you're on
man.
demon mode right now. You're good. You're fucking chilling,
Alright.
bro. This is the skate.
Alright, dark one.
Run it back.
The upside to this encounter, though, is there's 0 RNG. The nodes occur in the same location and order each and every time, but they obviously alternate sides, adding a layer of difficulty if your goal is to go fast. This means to make the second encounter as optimal as possible, you need to cross the chasm a lot. So if your well skates aren't on point, it's gonna be rough, and even if you're good at well skating, the ad density alone in this encounter makes it impossible to skate in some situations because you're just gonna track to ads. My team's first approach to the second encounter, which would eventually go on to change throughout the runs, was to split our team in 2, with half doing all the dark nodes and half doing all the light. This was quick and super easy to understand, but would require some people to cross the chasm much more than needed. That said, all there was to do was grab the source so that you had your buff, then go and hit the next node that you were assigned, and then wait there to hit the source for your teammates. Hitting the source would then spawn in the next node for them and allow your team of 3 to progress their color of nodes. Some people might be hitting 1 node, others might hit 2. Then after both sides are done, killing all the ads quickly meant that you could get to the next floor, and the process was the exact same after that. We ended up getting the routing down super fast, so with the extra time we had, we decided to move on to third encounter where we would face the Explicator. With first and second encounters out of the way, things became a joke. All that was left to do was bake bosses, where the goal was always to get a 1 phase, otherwise you were looking at a pretty substantial amount of time loss for your run. For third encounter, moving planets was the easy part. To do everything quickly, you just needed to spawn trap most of the enemies, call out which planets needed to be moved, and then do it fast. After that is where things actually get hard. Although it did take us some trial and error, we eventually got a pretty solid one-phase strat down, where we would manage to shoot 2 rockets, reloading with the perk Demolitionist by throwing a grenade, then swap and hit 1 ×4 Izanagi shot to deal the remainder of the boss's health. The only downside was doing this for each and every plate meant that if our team missed some snipes, we would typically fail. Now, I know hitting your crits sounds pretty easy, but when there's 100 Wolfpack rounds covering the boss, his crit is on his back, and he's shaking like he's fighting off the fentanyl demons, it can be kinda difficult. Either way, after tweaking some things here and there, and just getting used to the timing for when to shoot, the strat was good enough, and we need to focus on the final encounter to finalize our run. Nezarec is the final boss for Root of Nightmares, and although killing him is pretty damn easy, dealing with all his bullshit is definitely not fun. In a real run, somebody hitting a skip would also need to perma, otherwise your team would likely rib, so we decided to simulate this in practice. Also, I realized I haven't explained any of this speedrunning terminology, so just in case, here's a few of the things you might hear me say. A rib stands for run it back and is commonly used when anything major in the run goes wrong, whether you fail something like a skip or a boss bake, or even cause any major time loss, and the best action is then to just restart the raid and go from the beginning again. Time loss, as you just heard me say, is any time loss, so anytime a minor or major thing happens that adds time to your overall timer, it's causing time loss. A skip is pretty self-explanatory and just relies typically on movement tech to allow you to bypass things like jumping puzzles or anything else in between the main raid encounters, allowing you to speed up your time. In Root of Nightmares, there is a 0-1 skip, a 0-2 skip, a 2-3 skip, and then also a 3-4 skip, where these numbers designate the encounters you're skipping between. Perma is just short for permanent and often refers to a permanent rally flag that is typically placed down when the encounter starts so that it lasts for a longer duration than base and can be rallied upon at a later point than usual. Lastly, a PB just stands for your personal best, which is also super self-explanatory. It's the best run that you've ever achieved, while SOB, or sum of bests, is just the summation of the best times from each encounter if you were to combine them all into one single god run, showing you the best run that you could potentially ever achieve with the current strats that you have. Back to putting our run together, for Nezarec, only a few things were required. 2 teams would split up to take care of the nodes on each side, while someone on those teams would be designated to grab Nezarec's hatred so that he would stop booping your team into the air. And then lastly, after finishing the nodes, you just needed to clear ads, which helped start damage early. After that, the boss bake was as simple as spamming rockets and supers, and with that, our run was complete. With everything down, at this point we were finally ready to start getting in some initial runs, which would let us see where we were slow and where we could improve, chaining encounters back to back, and also give us our first PB. But over the weekend, in between runs, there was a pretty massive change that would go on to affect Root of Nightmare speedruns, which was the addition of DSM in the beginning of the raid. Now, if you're watching this and you don't know what DSM is, all good, because neither did we. And no, it's not BDSM. DSM stands for Default Spawn Manipulation. It sounds technical as hell, but in practice, all you need to do is cover a default spawn area that the game tries to spawn you in with some stasis crystals. This causes the game to then spawn anyone that is trying to respawn in a different default spawn location. In dummy terms, cover ground with blue rock, respawn somewhere cool. In Root of Nightmares, you're able to use this effectively to have one player do a 0-2 skip, which, as I mentioned earlier, makes it possible to instantly start the second encounter as soon as first encounter ends. The catch is that the player who's doing the 0-2 skip is starting the second encounter, which means the first encounter needs to be done with only 5 people, and the strat that we had relied on all 6 of us. So this meant if we did want to use optimal strats and push for a better time, a lot of the work for first and second encounter that we already did needed to be reworked. Now, with only 5 people to complete the nodes in first encounter, we went back to the drawing boards and optimized the hell out of things. For starts, we had seen some other teams start running 6 warlocks, so we decided to do the same, putting me on entrance skip to start and then pull the team to first encounter, while everyone else was helping set up DSM for the 0-2 skip. From here, we reworked the routing and mapped everything out to work with only 5 people. Every single person on our team now had a full set of routes to reference for each set of nodes they were doing, with distinct paths to minimize any downtime we had between shooting nodes, and we mapped out who would be killing which group of ads when, so that everybody ended up having enough super energy going into the second encounter, and those who needed to hit the first 2 nodes for a set would always be at the very first source location right as it spawned. Things were now more optimized than ever and would require a bit more practice to understand how each person might change their route depending on the order of nodes. It might not have been the perfect setup, but it was more or less what most teams were running, and most importantly, it worked for us. As I mentioned, by the time that first encounter was over, every player needed to have their super, because at this point, with Rec hitting the 0-2 skip using DSM, that meant we were getting pulled to second encounter and starting straight away. As we would load in, Rec ended up hitting the first node on each side, which is 1 light and 1 dark, and then from there, everything else in the route that we had before needed to be reworked. Once again, we sat down and mapped everything out. At this point, the team with the current record was down to just under 12 minutes, and they posted their run for others to see the strats they were using to optimize each encounter. So we were able to mimic some of those strats, adjusting them for our team as needed. Earlier, I had mentioned that with our previous strat, we had players crossing the chasm way more often than they should. By reworking the routes, not only did we reduce the amount of instances that each player was crossing, but we were also able to optimize routes to hit both sets of nodes. For example, after I would spawn in, I would cross over to the other side and grab the first dark source. I would then skate over and hit a dark node, and then wait to hit the light source to progress the light set of nodes, which would help progress things for my team. Doing it like this let each player's route become quicker, but more complex, saving us a bunch of time, but requiring better communication, and it was also a bit higher risk in some cases, because if one person made a single mistake, it really wasn't recoverable and would cause a rip.
L2.
L3, E4, L4,
E5.
E6.
It's a wipe, dude.
L5.
It's a
E7.
fucking wipe. It's a dude. It's just a GG.
While we were in the process of fixing things, since our boss bake in the Planets encounter was a bit inconsistent, we implemented 2 important changes. For the damage strat, we ended up swapping over 4 players to Strand. The super here is by far the best for damage on Warlocks, and we really only needed 1 Well of Radiance for a buff, and then someone on Tractor Cannon for our debuff. We also were able to use the mod Focus Darkness, so that anytime we were damaging on a dark plate, we got a 25% increase for our super damage. This made our one phase way more consistent, to the point that it would require a pretty big mistake to mess up. Second to this, we also started doing Aeon finishers on the Colossuses that spawned in around the arena. This generated a ton of heavy ammo for the team and was needed since I would be the person swapping to a sword after damage, doing the 3-4 skip. And in general, it also allowed us to stay on swords during the encounter to move the planets around slightly quicker, so we could switch to a rocket later and then pick up the ammo that way. With all of those reworks now fully implemented, we were easily 2 weeks into running Root of Nightmares, and that doesn't even include all the additional solo practice that people were putting in for their skips, nor all the additional minor changes that we made here and there just to shave off a few seconds. Even with all these optimizations, after running for another 3 weeks, our personal best run was still pretty bad. Scheduling made it hard to get consistent nights to run each week, and by the time we would get back to running, we were rusty, meaning we spent a good night or 2 just getting back into the swing of things for our full run. After these 3 weeks were up, the world record had been reduced down to less than 11 minutes, and we were still yet to get a half-decent run in. With the very last week of runs, we scheduled to run every single night, and although the runs weren't great, we were hitting PB after PB after PB, shaving off a few seconds each and every run. And then finally, after nearly 2 whole nights of the worst resets during the entire time running Root of Nightmares, with our mental health absolutely shattered, we hit our very last PB, where we completed the entire Root of Nightmares speedrun in just 12 minutes and 41 seconds.
So, but -4.
41? Now, obviously, if you guys do know anything about speedruns, especially for Root of Nightmares, compared to a lot of the times and teams out there, 1241 isn't very impressive. By the time that we finished running, world record was already down to 10 minutes and 16 seconds, and I'll try to get a link to the most updated world record run that's up on YouTube for Root of Nightmares in the description so that you guys can check that out. Overall, we definitely wanted to get a better time, and our sum of best was a lot better than the time we ended up getting, so we could have done a lot better, but for only running 20 times in total over the course of 6 weeks, I can't really complain. We run speedruns purely for fun and to try and challenge ourselves in the game, and I wanted to make this video not to ever try to show off our average ass time, but more so to showcase the speedrunning experience from my point of view, and to hopefully encourage others to get into speedrunning and the endgame community overall, even if it's just for fun. I did also really want to mention a lot of the runners on teams who have way better times helped us out a ton when it came to putting our full run together, and in a lot of cases the strats that we implemented came from these other teams. So I wanted to give a huge shout out to anyone and everyone who helped out during the streams, and if you guys are watching this video and you do want to get into speedrunning or just learn more about it, I will have a link to the speedrun panel Discord for Destiny 2 in the description below. On top of that, all of our runs were streamed over on my Twitch if you guys ever want to catch runs in the future. Also, do let me know if you like this style of video, and I'll keep making them for each and every speedrun that we do. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace. It is, okay.
Right. With the 1-inch pincher? I
What's the
don't think so.
momentum of it?
Like fucking
1-inch pincher? What the fuck are you talking about? What are you doing with your cock? How are you pinching people?
well, like the little lips on the urethra.
3, 2, 1, go. I think you said enough.
Ice. Yeah, there's like points in time where somebody questions what you say and you just like stop talking and you decide to double down in those moments, and I still don't know why.